All right, welcome to content dump number 8. No music this time. Thinking probably be better to phase out copywritten music. But anyway, we got a lot of things to talk about. Like, for example, the media manipulation that's currently happening in society, which is pretty crazy. Essentially, this clip is on Tim Pool's podcast, and he's talking about the trial for Derek Chauvin, the person who allegedly murdered George Floyd, and that's what they're trying to figure out with the trial. And basically, he's talking about how the media is covering it, and how through a series of sort of like mistakes, they literally show different people different things, like claiming them to be fact. It's pretty interesting. I'm going to play the clip.
Hypoxia. Interesting. Now, it seems like the doctor still went on to say he thinks that it was, he had no reason to believe it was a drug overdose. In which case, the doctor still, there's a cross-examination. The prosecution comes in and says, but isn't it possible that having your knee on someone's neck could result in hypoxia, which causes the heart to stop? And the doctor said yes. I still think it's very, very fascinating. The doctor said it's the reason fentanyl is so dangerous. And so I went, whoa. I was like, we should definitely talk about this. So I Google searched it, right? I Google searched, defense, Chauvin, hypoxia. And I see this. Check this out. Look at this Google search. You can see I searched for Dr. Chauvin hypoxia. 5 hours ago, ABC News, ER doc theorizes lack of oxygen stopped Floyd's heart. You can see in these, the text here, they questioned whether or not some drugs can cause hypoxia. You can see right here as well, Baltimore Sun, Derek Chauvin trial, ER doctor testifies. You scroll down. There's even more. George Floyd's heart likely stopped hypoxia.
So for anyone who's already getting angry because these are theories about George Floyd dying not based on Chauvin killing him, these are theories about, whether it was lack of oxygen, fentanyl, or some other type of drug overdose. So I can tell right off the bat, even questioning this stuff is, you're not supposed to do it in polite society, but the whole point here isn't about Derek Chauvin and the trial over George Floyd's death. The whole point is about specifically these articles that pop up. And so that's what he's about to get to now.
What do you think happens if I click this story? All right, let's open up ABC. Police. Let me turn this off. The headline's different. Kneeling on Floyd's neck violated policy. Well, that's not what I Google searched. I didn't search for that headline. Yeah. I wanted to know about the hypoxia.
This is why you use DuckDuckGo.
Well, hold on. Let's go to the Baltimore Sun. Derek Chauvin trial. ER doctor testifies. All right, well, let's learn about the ER doctor so I can pull up the source and show everybody. Derek Chauvin trial. Kneeling on George Floyd's neck violated our policy. Well, that's not what I Google searched. So what's happening is that the Associated Press changed the headline on all their articles after they were already published. So for me, who's trying to search for this to show everybody what's going on, we're getting a different story which changes the framing. Think about it. If the doctor said hypoxia caused this, and fentanyl, it's like the main reason fentanyl is dangerous is that it can lead to hypoxia. And then I'm like, I want to show that to people because it's a very important point for the defense. And then all of the headlines change to say, kneeling on the neck violated policy. Wow. Well, all of a sudden now the articles that I'm pulling up and would likely show someone, imagine this. Imagine I had that story. Right when I saw the doctor say this, I went, whoa. And I shared that story on Facebook or Twitter.
Wow.
Then along comes, my mom or my dad or my brother, and they're like, what's this that Tim shared? And they click it. And instead of getting the story where I'm like, this is important, they get a different story. Chauvin violated policy.
And so this is what I'm describing with media manipulation. They're able to act like it's a mistake, like they, because this is called like stealth editing an article. It's where you basically change an article after it's already been indexed in Google. And then, sometimes companies will put, or different media outlets will put like, this was edited on this date. And sometimes they'll put it at the bottom of the article that no one ever gets to. And some of them, I assume, don't even mention that they've updated the article at all. But it's considered stealth editing, and it's kind of frowned upon, but it doesn't really matter because you already get the initial click count from the first title, and then another apparently, and then you can change it later and be like, oh, it doesn't matter. But another nefarious thing is that you can literally have people thinking they're sending one article to someone and actually sending a different article to someone, and it leans in one political direction every time. I think that was all from that clip. But a little later on in the same podcast, they go on and explain it a little more.
Bring up that very well, like putting a knee on someone's neck could result in hypoxia. The reason why I think this is important, though, is it offers a counterpoint to the narrative we've all already heard. When I try to pull up the articles, we get something entirely different. That's creepy manipulation, stealth editing that shapes the narrative. And here's my fear. When I'm reading all this news, I see a lot of really, really important points from the defense. Notably that there's training materials they've highlighted, a PowerPoint showing a cop kneeling on someone's neck. This stuff many people have seen. In the trial, there was an argument between the defense and the judge as to whether or not this actually mattered because Chauvin did not undergo that specific training. The argument from the defense was if the cops are all, doing this and saying this is an updated policy, then it makes sense that this might, exist. These things don't appear. Like the points from the defense about hypoxia, about drug use, about, what we talked about the other day. What was I can't remember all the details. The media always headlines with Chauvin guilty.
So again, to anyone who's hesitant to want to listen to this stuff because they don't want Chauvin to walk, they believe he murdered George Floyd. If that's the case, please understand that the information is sort of irrelevant here. They happen to be talking about the case of George Floyd, but what he's really explaining is how the narrative is set to make you think one thing, and so if another thing happens, you'll go crazy. And that's what he's about to explain here, where he thinks that the media is attempting to make it look like Chauvin is guilty when it's possible they overcharged him and they might only be able to get him on like manslaughter as opposed to murder. And they don't really tell you that. The media specifically doesn't tell you that. In fact, they change their articles to tell you that Chauvin will probably get convicted. And Tim's theory is that they're doing this to prime a whole subsection of the world to flip shit when it turns out that Chauvin won't be charged for murder because they overcharged him. They can only get him on, involuntary manslaughter or something like that.
Right. So now we have this. We have the police chief testified that Chauvin violated policy. But there's another really crazy story, and the media frames it. Check this out from Forbes. Derek Chauvin defense shows video clip to suggest knelt on George Floyd's shoulder, not his neck. That's right. And when the police chief was shown the video, get this, the police chief was shown the video and the defense said, based on this alternate camera angle from a body camera, would you say that Chauvin, it appeared he was kneeling on Floyd's shoulder? The police chief said, yes.
Okay.
Shouldn't these things be like, look, we all know.
And again, he's pointing that out not to say that the defense is correct or Chauvin is innocent, but just to say that this is happening in the court right now and it's not being talked about through the media. They seem to only want to talk about how Chauvin is likely guilty because that's the narrative that everyone's supposed to hear. But it seems like the narrative is about to turn on people when he gets let off, and that's going to justify rioting.
Oh, that the narrative has been Chauvin kneeled on Floyd's neck. It's bad, and he's a bad cop. He was fired for it. When evidence comes out that suggests the official narrative may be wrong, shouldn't that be the highlight for a lot of reasons? Here's the creepy thing. I look at the AP. So all these headlines from all these outlets, it's the same article. It's the Associated Press, and they're just republishing the AP. I don't think there's anything nefarious necessarily. I think there's an inherent bias with a lot of these companies. And they're thinking like, oh, okay, more information has come out. Let's change the headline.
Interesting.
They initially did run the headline, ER doctor suggests hypoxia, fentanyl can cause this.
So Tim doesn't think there's anything nefarious going on. He thinks it's just kind of the incentive structure is set up this way to where this thing happens that happens to be basically gaslighting an entire subsection of society and priming them for violence. This is from James Lindsay, just his Twitter account, and they're talking about the differences between DuckDuckGo and Google, which are two search engines. And so recently there were riots. Hold on, I think there's been on it. The volume. Recently, there's been riots going on for some things that have been happening, and like essentially, a cop mistook her gun for her taser when somebody was fleeing arrest and shot somebody, and now they're doing Black Lives Matter and Antifa or whatever are basically rioting again, and now the cops are going much harder on them for it because they don't have to. They don't have to now that Biden's in office, and no one's going to call Biden a fascist, whereas they would have called Trump a fascist. Since Biden's in office now, they can basically, as you can see, run over these Antifa, BLM protesters. But anyway, so that's kind of an aside from what I was talking about. But essentially, there are riots going on right now, and if you search on DuckDuckGo, which is not Google, they will tell you, there's a bunch of different riots going on after the Daunte Wright shooting, and they'll tell you what is really happening. But if you search on Google riots today, it'll talk from USA Today. There's 3 from USA Today and 1 from Fox News, and Fox News talks about what's actually happening as recently, the Daunte Wright shooting and the resulting riots. But USA Today is thrown in there 3 times talking about things that happened back on January 6th. And so his comment is algorithmic fairness, because they're trying to be fair and show, right-wing violence versus left-wing violence, when in reality they're just they're obviously being partisan here. Just more media manipulation. And then there's also plenty of nonsense going on with guns that I was gonna just kind of bring up to say that Biden is thinking of banning, enacting more gun control, whether it's banning pistol braces or 3D printed guns or AR-15s or whatever it is. There's lots of stuff in the works right now, which can't really comment much on because we don't know what's going to happen yet. But all I would say is just don't comply. And fight it as hard as you can. Anyway, kind of irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make, which is still about media manipulation. And so this was something on Google. If you go to Google News and search mass shootings surge, this was from a couple of weeks ago, I think, but it basically says mass shooting surge in Florida as nation faces record high, and then another one, except in Tennessee, nation faces record high. Another one in Wisconsin, nation faces record high. They surge in South Carolina, and then Pennsylvania, and in New York, and in Ohio, and it's literally copy and pasted. And this was before any of these mass shootings, kind of the recent ones, started happening, because there has been a police shooting and another just person shooting people. I haven't heard too much news. I think it was in Tennessee or something, not sure, but it's all just coming out. And this was before all of it. They were primed with these articles to maintain establishment power. And right now the establishment is very anti-gun, and for a lot of, looking from their perspective, they should be, because the government is overstepping in a lot of ways, and the way you keep government in check is with guns. So if you were a government dictator, you'd want to get rid of the guns. However, I'm not, and I don't agree with that nonsense. So this type of media manipulation is all over the fucking place. It's ridiculous. And speaking of the establishment and their acts to justify themselves, this is one of Dave Smith's more recent podcasts. He just does a good little rant on justifying the establishment, and he's talking more in the economic realm of how you would justify the establishment, but I want to play this clip.
So that's much easier to play ball with. And that's kind of how it happens all the time. There's a reason why guys like Keynes or Rawls, or some of these guys who are completely backed by the establishment, and everyone, everyone throughout the entire, ruling elite cathedral will hold them up as these brilliant thinkers. A lot of that is just because they justify them having more power.
So Keynes and Rawls there, who he's talking about, are economists. Keynes obviously having Keynesian economics, which is on the scale of free market to total centralized control. Keynes is right next to communism when it comes to, centralized economic control. So he's talking about economists.
They love there's nothing that the establishment loves more than an intellectual who justifies their power. They're like, oh yeah, see, it's not that we're robbing from the American people to just give all of this money to our corporate donors. No, we just believe in Keynesian economics, right? So it's just, look, we have this intellectual guy here who justified it. Now, don't think for a second that there's any politicians out there who sat down and read Mises, Hayek, and Keynes and just decided that Keynes made superior arguments. They're Keynesians because Keynes gives them a justification to have more power. And that's how it happens with all of these things. And that's why they prefer the woke shit over the economic populist stuff.
And so there he's talking about how the establishment kind of does this woke capitalism stuff where they'll go along with the trans rights and the Black Lives Matter and that type of stuff, but they don't want to do economic populism. That's why Bernie Sanders was popular and then got kind of cut out. It's the establishment choosing the woke ideology over what true leftism used to be. And he's another point Dave Smith's been making recently is to not confuse Biden for a leftist or for a communist. This is a form of so he's not a ideological Marxist, but he is willing to bow down to the woke ideology because that helps push their corporatist mixed economy nonsense. And that's very similar to fascism. That is what all totalitarian governments do. It doesn't matter if it's communist or if it's fascist or national socialist or whatever it is. They need centralized power, and and the woke people are essentially the useful idiots who, instead of worrying about wars going on in the Middle East, they're going to worry about surface level issues of accusations of racism or sexism or something like that. But so that's something to be aware of, that they don't get fooled by the wokeness they're really totalitarians. But another thing, he was saying that this is they would rather go with Keynes than Hayek in the economic realm because Keynes justifies a larger use of power by the government. That's analogous to what's happening in our school systems. And so before I go on to that, there is no marketplace of ideas in the realm of government because power will always be justified. So in our school systems, people often think that there is this marketplace of ideas, but it's really not. What you teach your kids is actually really relevant because we have a bunch of people growing up nowadays with this weird collectivist mindset that the government is our parents and we kind of work for each other. It's similar to how communists acted, but you can't say that because that's such a dated term and it has specific people that it makes you think of, and it's usually in the realm of economics as opposed to what our modern day totalitarian thing is. It's the thing we're dealing with today is much more cultural and but anyway, when it comes to the school systems, what they teach kids, it's not just what the free market wants their children to learn and or whatever. It's in the same way that they would choose Keynes over Mises or Hayek. They're going to choose to teach children that government is good and the tool that should be used to solve all problems, as opposed to a good government is a small government, or things like that. So anyway, these useful idiots that are being taught in our government school systems because of the incentive structure of government, which is to kind of train statists, to train people to think that the way you solve all problems in the world is to just vote it in, and that's the moral thing to do, or something like that. These ideas have roots. And so James Lindsay, this is his New Discourses podcast, and he's going over criticisms of his book, and he he basically explains the history of what I'm just describing: the useful idiots, the woke people. So what I have some notes. The woke are a religious group used to justify government power using emotional arguments. So like that people that are truly woke, like the true believers in this, they cannot question. Like there are certain things, for instance, if it involves criticizing a protected class, then logic is thrown out the window. That you get that in a lot of the different critical theories. Like you're not allowed to question whether or not critical race theory is actually just racist, because you're dealing with an oppressed class that you're really not allowed to criticize. So this, they're creating a base of people that view things through a certain lens, and it is very much like a religion. And this religion has blasphemy laws. Essentially, you're not allowed to question their key people, whether it's people of color or trans people or gay people or disabled people or whatever it is. They're using that as a way to say, you cannot question me, therefore I'm going to push this illogical argument. So this is how you can justify totalitarianism. You can justify a lot of very horrible things that sounded good in the moment, like wanting to help trans people, but oops, we got rid of like for instance, with Jordan Peterson was talking about how they're involving compelled speech, and they're getting rid of free speech with like hate speech laws and things like that. And it sounds really nice to help trans people, but the result of it is the degradation of our the First Amendment of the founding documents of our government. And that these people have roots. Like it's not like these kids just all of a sudden randomly started thinking this way. That you can trace this back, and that's what James Lindsay is sort of doing in this podcast. He's talking about for instance, there's like these group of French postmodernists that are very influential. Then you can go all the way back to like Hegel and how he's influential with his dialectic of history that informed Marx on his dialectic materialism, and how once Marx failed, then there was these people, like there was Antonio Gramsci, and then there was like Max Horkheimer at the Frankfurt School of Social, I forget what it actually is, but at the Frankfurt School, and how these people saw the failure of Marxism and decided to shift into culture, and that there were like 5 main things that you had to counter, these hegemonic institutions that you had to counter and kind of subvert and take over in order to allow for a type of Marxist proletarian revolution. And the people at the Frankfurt School, what they came up with was critical theory. And critical theory is, whether it's a post-colonial theory or critical race theory or queer theory or all these different things, what they're designed to do is to tear apart these hegemonic structures or institutions within a society, and that will kind of demoralize and weaken a society's culture, their shared culture, to the point where they will be more susceptible to kind of a statist religion or totalitarianism or communism. And you can actually trace this all back, and that's what he's doing here. But I wanted to play just a little clip just to see how dense and knowledgeable he is. I don't mean dense in a negative way. This video is very dense. He talks about all these different lines and how they intersect, and I've listened to it 3 times through already. So
right before the critical theory school started, which started in 1920, right as it was starting, you had kind of these communists who were not able to pull off the tricks that they wanted to pull, especially Georgi Lukács, who was a leader in the Hungarian Revolution that took for a few months and failed. And then he got in cahoots with Gramsci, who we'll come back to, but also with Horkheimer, Max Horkheimer, who was the first director of, or one of the first directors, maybe not the very first director, of the Frankfurt School, the Institute for Social Research set up in Frankfurt, Germany, with the goal of figuring out why Marxist revolutions weren't happening, with the goal of tying in social sciences like Freudian psychoanalysis and Weberian sociology, maybe even Durkheimian, but more Weberian sociology, and trying to sort out why is it that Western civilization is resistant. And they developed critical theory out of this. And like I said, their objective turned out to be, sometimes people say that they aim to marry Marx to Freud, which is true, especially of Marcuse. But it's probably better to say that the guys like Horkheimer, what they were trying to do was to solve the problem of why Marx's ideas failed, and they traced heavily backwards to his earliest writings, his young Hegelian days, or his most young Hegelian days, and they tried to take, and remember I said that Marx said that he turned Hegel on his head. Well, they tried to turn Hegel back upright, and so what that entailed was trying to put more of the dialectic process in, and to shift out of the economic realm so much and more into cultural and idea realms. So we had people like Theodor Adorno who are talking constantly about music and aesthetics. Max Horkheimer is kind of constantly talking about the vestiges of culture. And they had this general belief, which I think largely came from Gramsci, who was imprisoned by that point and not in communication with them. They had this general belief that these kind of vestiges of culture hold Western civilization together, and they prevent people from wanting to abandon the capitalist thing. So this develops into a second phase after World War II, where Herbert Marcuse is now kind of in charge, and we've talked about in great detail. I have more podcasts about him coming. We're going to do his essay on liberation soon.
All right, so there's a lot of name drops there, a lot of realms of philosophy kind of dropped there, but this... he's talking about like young Hegelianism. If you listen to the whole podcast, he'll go through exactly what that is. And like, if you listen to his other podcasts, you'll know who these people are that he's talking about. So it's a lot to dive into. I just wanted to kind of give you a taste of how he's able to tie together all these webs of thought, and how like this woke ideology only uses what is useful to it. Like a true postmodernist would not be woke or Marxist because they reject meta-narratives, and both of those would be considered a meta-narrative, but they don't necessarily care that a true postmodernist or a true Hegelian, young Hegelian, or like a true Marxist would go against any of these things. That's kind of unnecessary, because they're just taking what is relevant and using it to pursue power, which again is kind of all the establishment is trying to do. It's not, like I said, it's not a marketplace of ideas that's happening here. Government taints free market capitalism, and I guess you could say free market ideas. It taints it because there's a reason why you would want to justify yourself having more power, and that is the pursuit of power. So it doesn't matter if something's right or wrong. Whatever one justifies more power, that's the one you're going to go to. So definitely worth listening to if you're interested in kind of where this is all coming from, either through the universities or how that, like, why is it that these new critical theories happen to be running kind of our military, our HR departments across major corporations. Why is it being pushed in corporate news or corporate media, like like the New York Times or CNN? If you're wondering why all of this stuff is happening, and it's always happening in one direction, James Lindsay at New Discourses is doing a lot of good work on that. And then I wanted to, oddly enough, just touch on, because it's a huge topic, but the vaccine passport. I feel like I have to at least bring it up, because my opinion should obviously be obvious. I wrote an article about how this vaccine is not similar to other vaccines on my website and why I won't be getting it, but the vaccine passport is an entirely different topic, because not only is this vaccine this vaccine different from other vaccines, but the passport implies a domestic passport for travel and engagement in commerce, which is what this is completely different than just deciding that you want to get the vaccine for COVID-19. So don't those are two things that people are going to conflate when talking about this, and don't let them do it. One is that this vaccine is similar to other vaccines, and two is that the vaccine passport is necessary for the distribution of this vaccine, because a domestic passport for engagement in commerce, like literally, like you would need it to get on a train or go to Walmart or whatever. That is very different. And yes, there will be corporations doing it. The Biden administration flirted with the idea of doing a federal wide one, and then they said they're not going to do it. And that's because people would literally like revolt against that. But what's going to happen is major corporations that are highly regulated and in cahoots with the government. So no, they're not free market endeavors, but yeah, the corporations are going to be the ones that are enforcing this. And it's going to attempt to create a two-tiered system. I feel like there will be states that are more into it and states that are less into it. Like for instance, I think Florida and Texas and some other of the good ones have outlawed this concept of a vaccine passport. And then what I can predict from there is that states that enforce the vaccine passport will probably limit travel from states that don't enforce the vaccine passport because of public health or whatever, whatever the fuck that means. Can you take the public's temperature? And how do they have public health? So anyway, not to get sidetracked, it's the vaccine passport has a lot of implications. I think it will come down to a literal apartheid state if enough people don't revolt against it, and that is likely what they're going to try to do. Likely what happened in China after they implemented this same strategy that I was just talking about with James Lindsay, this strategy, this woke strategy to engage in a cultural revolution. Like that's what Mao did. And it's been said, and James Lindsay says this, that Mao basically did what Stalin couldn't do based off of like what Gramsci talked about. So Gramsci would be like the cultural Marxist, the one who transitioned economic Marxism into the realm of culture and, forming a counter hegemony. So what James Lindsay says is that like Mao basically did what Gramsci thought of. And what it was a cultural revolution. And that's essentially what's happening here in America. And like the Chinese social credit system limits travel, and it limits all different types of things, engagement in commerce, and based off of a credit system, that you don't know or have access to the number or whatever. And that's what's attempting to be implemented in America, and it's being justified through public health and like a pandemic. Essentially, that's the justification for a new social credit caste system. And so anyway, you can agree or disagree with me on that. All I'm saying is this vaccine is not the same as others, and this vaccine passport has horrible implications to it. Then to end it, I just wanted to talk about just some notes that I have here, because I got an interesting advertisement today. So I'm just going to read through it. By the way, iPhones are $5 a month. $5 a month. Seems almost too good to be true, right? So I just got an ad on my phone for Sparkling Bud, like a beer, sparkling water beer. And just got an ad on my phone for Sparkling Bud nonsense. And the ad was geared for days off. It said, don't just take time off, relax, or something like that. It knows because of my GPS location and what time it is that I have taken a day off of work, and it is pushing ads custom made for me. And this is all non-conspiratorial. It is known that Google and Facebook and other companies set up kind of profiles for you, and they know what you do. They know when you're going to the bathroom. They know when you're driving. Obviously, GPS data would make that obvious, but they know your habits, and they attempt to sell you products because of it. But think of the implications of that. So what I wrote is Google's AI could literally know how much paid time off different companies give to their workers based off of the data they collect from the worker's cell phone. So right now, Google knows, and a lot of different companies, based off of my cell phone data, they know that I'm taking a day off work, and they could count that and see how many days a year I get off. And same with everyone else who works at my company, because they all have phones too. And then they could do that for every company because they have all that data. And then they could know, okay, this company and that company give this amount of paid time off. And that would essentially be like insider information. they could build profiles of businesses in order to rank their potential value using this type of information. It's similar to having insider information on the stock market. And then I wrote, there are so many negative implications associated with the existence of power like this. Like, this type of data collection is a power, and the implications of that go from domestic population control, similar to like the social credit system I was just talking about, that the vaccine passport, like it sounds similar to. So domestic population control, you could go off on that about how, if they have all this information, how could they use it to kind of control and propagandize people. You could talk about the destruction of our current structure of government. We seem to be veering towards more of a direct democracy as opposed to a representative republic confined by a constitution and a Bill of Rights. And you could see how someone with this amount of information and this ability to send different media and different ads to different demographic groups of people, how they could inch things more in the direction of a direct democracy and then control those populations, because that's what democracy is. It's the ruling of demographics, or the rule of the majority. But how do you gain a majority? Usually a coalition of different demographics, and that's what Lenin knew. Leninism is essentially that, figuring out like how you can create coalitions. But anyway, then another one is international policy. So with a multinational corporation, because Google or whoever has access to my phones, they don't just operate in America, they operate elsewhere, and they might have certain markets might be more valuable to them than our market, like for instance China's market. And so if they have this amount of information on a domestic population and they're not necessarily loyal to that domestic population, the international policy that implications that you could get from that are terrifying. And so literally just one ad sent me down this rabbit hole of like, what the hell kind of power do these companies have? But anyway, that's gonna be about it. Basically just was talking about media manipulation, how this establishment justifies itself, and the useful idiots that they use. So if you're interested in any of this, you should definitely look into it. I will have the links in the description below, and that's going to be all for now.